The stagecoach robbery that left Sarah Henderson stranded in the Texas wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a broken locket wasn't the worst thing that had happened to her that year, though it came close. She stood on the dusty trail outside Austin in the summer of 1878, watching the bandits disappear over the ridge with everything she owned, including the money she'd saved to start her seamstress business. The driver lay dead, the other passengers scattered into the scrub brush, and she was alone with the buzzing flies and her racing heart. She'd been betrayed before, 3 times to be exact. First by her father, who'd promised to keep the family farm but gambled it away. Then by Thomas, her fiancé back in Missouri, who'd sworn to marry her but ran off with a saloon girl 2 weeks before their wedding. Most recently by her business partner in St. Louis, who'd taken their shared funds and disappeared, leaving her with nothing but debts and broken dreams. Sarah had learned that promises were just pretty words that men used to get what they wanted. The sun beat down mercilessly as she started walking back toward Austin, her boots already raising blisters. She'd made it perhaps 2 miles when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Her heart seized with terror, the bandits returning to finish what they'd started. Instead, a massive man on an equally massive horse appeared over the rise. He was unlike anyone Sarah had ever seen, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders, a thick beard, and a body that seemed carved from the very mountains he clearly called home. His buckskin shirt stretched tight across a chest and arms that rippled with muscle, and his weathered face held eyes the color of a winter sky. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and steady, "you're a long way from anywhere." Sarah straightened her spine, refusing to show fear even though she was alone with a stranger. "The stage was robbed. I'm walking back to Austin." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress and the exhaustion she was trying to hide. "That's 15 miles. You'll never make it before dark, and there are worse things than bandits out here after sundown. I'll manage." She started walking again, determined not to accept help from yet another man who'd probably want something in return. The sound of his horse following made her tense. "Name's Xander Stone. I've got a cabin about 3 miles north. You can rest there, get some water and food, and I'll take you into Austin in the morning." "No, thank you." Sarah kept her eyes forward. "Wasn't really a question, madam. You've got maybe an hour before you collapse from heat exhaustion, and I'm not the kind of man who leaves a woman to die in the wilderness." Something in his tone made her stop and turn. There was no threat in his voice, no manipulation. Just a simple statement of fact delivered with the same certainty as saying the sky was blue. "Why would you help me?" The words came out harsher than she intended. Xander dismounted in one fluid motion, and she had to crane her neck to look up at him. He had to be at least 6'4", his frame broad and powerful. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because my mother raised me better than to leave folks stranded. Take your pick. Men don't do things without expecting something in return." A flicker of something crossed his face, understanding perhaps, or sympathy. "Then you've known the wrong kind of men. I'm offering shelter for the night, nothing more. You can bar the door if it makes you feel safer. But I'm telling you true, you won't survive out here alone." Sarah's legs chose that moment to buckle slightly, proving his point. She caught herself, but the dizziness was undeniable. She'd been traveling since dawn, hadn't eaten since yesterday, and the Texas sun was unforgiving. "One night," she said finally, "and I'll work for my keep. I can cook or mend or whatever needs doing." "Fair enough." He held out his hand to help her onto the horse. She hesitated before taking it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle despite the obvious strength in those massive hands. He swung up behind her with ease, and Sarah tried to ignore the wall of solid muscle at her back as they rode north. Xander's cabin sat in a clearing near a creek, built solid from pine logs with a stone chimney. It was simple but well-maintained, with a small corral holding 2 additional horses and a vegetable garden that was actually thriving. "You live out here alone?" Sarah asked as he helped her down. "Prefer it that way. Come into Austin every few weeks for supplies, but mostly I keep to myself." He led her to the door and pushed it open. "Make yourself comfortable. There's a pitcher of water on the table, and I'll get a fire going for coffee." The interior was surprisingly clean and organized. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and various furs and tools hung on the walls. It smelled like pine and leather and wood smoke. Sarah drank deeply from the water pitcher while Xander moved around the space with practiced efficiency. He had the fire going in minutes and coffee brewing shortly after. Then he disappeared outside and returned with a rabbit he must have caught earlier. "You don't have to do that," Sarah said as he began preparing the meat. "I said I'd work for my keep. You can barely stand. Sit down before you fall down." It wasn't an order, just a calm observation. She wanted to argue but couldn't find the energy. Instead, she sank into one of the chairs and watched him work. His movements were confident and economical, no wasted motion. Within half an hour, he had the rabbit roasting over the fire along with some potatoes from his garden. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "About 5 years. Came down from Colorado after." He paused, his jaw tightening. "After my wife and daughter died, needed to be somewhere different." The pain in his voice was genuine, and Sarah felt her defenses lower slightly. "I'm sorry. Mountain fever took them both within a week. Couldn't do anything but watch." He poked at the fire, his face shadowed. "Anyway, that's why I'm here." "What brings you to Texas?" Sarah found herself telling him the truth, maybe because of the grief they shared or maybe because something about Xander Stone invited honesty. She told him about the broken promises, the betrayals, the decision to start fresh in Austin where no one knew her or her history of poor judgment. "Guess that didn't work out so well either," she finished bitterly. Xander handed her a plate of food. "Day's not over yet. You're alive, you're safe, and tomorrow's a new start." "You really believe that, after losing everything?" "Have to. Otherwise, what's the point?" He settled into the other chair with his own plate. "World's full of people who'll let you down, but it's also full of folks who'll help you up. Trick is not letting the first kind make you blind to the second." They ate in silence for a while. The food was simple but good, and Sarah felt strength returning to her limbs. As darkness fell outside, Xander lit a lantern and then gestured to the bed. "You take it. I'll sleep outside." "This is your home, I can't take your bed." "Already made up my mind." He grabbed a bedroll from a chest. "Door bars from the inside, you'll be safe." Sarah wanted to protest, but exhaustion was pulling at her. "Thank you, truly." Xander nodded and headed for the door. He paused on the threshold. "I'll take you into Austin first thing tomorrow, just like I said. You have my word." After he left, Sarah barred the door and collapsed onto the bed. It smelled like pine and leather, just like the rest of the cabin. She expected to lie awake, suspicious and alert, but instead she fell into the deepest sleep she'd had in months. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, and when she unbarred the door, she found Xander crouched by the fire outside, cooking breakfast. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Figured you could use a good meal before the ride." Sarah felt oddly disoriented. He'd kept his word. Such a simple thing, but in her experience so rare. "You didn't have to do all this." "Didn't have to, wanted to." He handed her a plate loaded with bacon, eggs, and fried cornmeal. "Eat up. It's a couple hours to Austin." The ride into town passed mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable quiet. Xander sat straight and alert, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Sarah noticed he had a rifle strapped to his saddle and a knife at his belt, but he never made her feel threatened. If anything, she felt safer than she had in years. Austin was bustling when they arrived, the streets full of wagons and horses and people going about their business. Xander guided them to the sheriff's office first. "Need to report that robbery," he explained as he helped her down. Sheriff Morrison was a stocky man with a gray mustache who took their statement with professional efficiency. He knew about the attack already from another passenger who'd made it back, and the driver's body had been recovered. "We'll do what we can, Miss Henderson, but those bandits are likely long gone by now," Morrison said sympathetically. "At least you're safe, that's what matters." "She lost everything," Xander said quietly. "She's going to need help." Morrison nodded. "There's a boarding house on 3rd Street, run by Mrs. Walsh. She's fair and might give you a few days if you explain the situation." Sarah's pride bristled at the charity, but what choice did she have? "Thank you, Sheriff." Outside, Xander was still standing by his horse, his expression thoughtful. "Come on, I'll take you to the boarding house. You've done enough. I can find it myself." "I'm sure you can, but I'm still going to make sure you get there safe." That same calm certainty in his voice, Mrs. Walsh was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She listened to Sarah's story, glanced at Xander's serious face, and made up her mind. "I can give you a week's room and board if you help with the cooking and cleaning," she said. "After that, we'll see where you are." "Thank you. I promise I'll work hard." "I'm sure you will, dear." Mrs. Walsh patted her hand. "Go on up. 2nd door on the left. There's a basin if you want to freshen up." Sarah turned to thank Xander, but he was already pulling something from his saddlebag. He handed her a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. "No," she said immediately. "I can't take your money. It's not charity. It's a loan. Pay me back when you get on your feet." He pressed it into her hands before she could protest further. "And I'll be back next week to check on you. Make sure you're doing all right." "Why?" the question burst out of her. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Xander was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes holding hers. "Because somebody should. And because I'd like to think if my wife and daughter had been stranded somewhere, someone would have helped them." Then he was gone, riding out of Austin before Sarah could find words to respond. She stood there holding the pouch, feeling the weight of it in her palm, and something shifted inside her chest. The next week passed in a blur of work. Sarah threw herself into helping Mrs. Walsh, cooking meals for the other boarders, scrubbing floors, and mending linens. The landlady was true to her word, fair but firm, and Sarah appreciated the structure after so much chaos. She used part of Xander's money to buy fabric and thread, working late into the night on a dress for Mrs. Walsh's daughter. When she presented it, the older woman's eyes widened. "This is beautiful work, dear. You said you were a seamstress." "I was trying to be, before everything fell apart." Mrs. Walsh examined the dress more closely, noting the precise stitching and elegant lines. "I have friends who'd pay good money for work like this. Would you be interested?" Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. "Yes, absolutely." By the time Xander rode back into Austin the following week, Sarah had 3 commissions and enough money to pay Mrs. Walsh for another month. She was sitting on the boarding house porch, hemming a skirt, when she saw him ride up. Her heart did an odd little skip that she tried to ignore. Xander dismounted and walked over, his long hair tied back, his buckskin shirt dusty from travel. "Mrs. Walsh treating you right. She's been wonderful. And look." Sarah held up the skirt. "I've got customers already." Something that might have been pride flickered in his eyes. That's good. Real good. You getting settled then? Yes, thanks to you. She set down her sewing. I can start paying you back now if you want. Keep it. Use it to build your business. He glanced at the boarding house. You got time for a walk. There's something I wanted to talk to you about. Curious and slightly nervous, Sarah agreed. They walked toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. Xander seemed to be gathering his thoughts. I've been thinking, he said finally, about how you said you were starting a seamstress business. Thing is, Austin's getting bigger every year. More people means more need for services, but it also means more competition. I'm aware. What if you had a place to work that wasn't competition? Somewhere folks don't usually go but still need supplies and services. Sarah frowned. I don't understand. The mining camps and settlements in the hills. They're full of men who need clothes mended, shirts made, that kind of thing. They'd pay well for someone skilled, and there's no one else offering it out there. You're suggesting I travel to mining camps, alone? No. Xander stopped walking and faced her. I'm suggesting we work together. I know all those camps, trade with them regular. You come with me on my supply runs, offer your services, and we split the profits. You'd have protection, guaranteed customers, and a way to build up your savings fast. It was a practical proposal, even brilliant in its way, but Sarah's defenses immediately rose. What do you get out of it? Company on long rides, a business partner I can trust, and maybe. He hesitated, something vulnerable crossing his face. Maybe a friend, been alone a long time, wouldn't mind having someone to talk to. The honesty in his voice disarmed her. I don't know. The last business partner I had robbed me blind. I know, but I'm not him. Xander met her eyes steadily. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to believe me. I don't make promises lightly. My word is all I've got out here, and I'd die before I broke it. So I'm promising you now, if we do this, I'll treat you fair, protect you on the trails, and never take more than my agreed share. And if at any point you want out, just say the word. Sarah studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. She found none, only that same steady certainty that seemed to be his defining characteristic. Let me think about it, she said finally. Fair enough. I'll be in town a few days, staying at the hotel. Let me know before I leave. That evening, Sarah discussed the proposal with Mrs. Walsh over tea in the kitchen. Xander Stone has been coming through Austin for years, the older woman said thoughtfully. Never heard a bad word about him. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's honest in his dealings. Lost his family up in Colorado and came down here to start fresh. He told me. But is he trustworthy? Really? Honey, I've seen a lot of men come and go in this town. Most of them are all talk and no follow through. But Stone, Mrs. Walsh poured more tea, he's different. If he gives his word, he keeps it. That's his reputation. What if he wants more than a business arrangement? Then you tell him no. But from what I've seen, he's not the type to push. Seems to me like he's just lonely and trying to help someone who needs it. The landlady fixed Sarah with a knowing look. Question is, can you risk trusting someone again? Because you can't build a life being afraid of everyone. Sarah thought about that all night. Mrs. Walsh was right. She couldn't live in fear forever. And Xander had already proven himself once by keeping his promise to bring her to Austin. Maybe he was exactly what he appeared to be. A good man who'd been hurt by life but hadn't let it make him cruel. The next morning she found him at the general store, loading supplies onto his pack horse. Her heart hammered as she approached. I'll do it, she said without preamble. Your business proposal, but I have conditions. Xander turned, his expression carefully neutral. I'm listening. First, equal partnership. We split everything 50-50. Second, I want our agreement in writing, signed and witnessed. Third, if I ever feel unsafe or want to end the arrangement, you respect that immediately with no argument. Agreed to all of it. He didn't even hesitate. Anything else? Yes, no broken promises. Ever. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. If circumstances change and you can't, you tell me immediately and honestly. I've had enough of men who say one thing and do another. Something fierce flickered in Xander's eyes. You have my word. I'll keep every promise I make to you or die trying. The intensity of his vow sent a shiver through her. Then we have a deal. They went to the sheriff's office to have their agreement written up and witnessed. Morrison raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, just made sure everything was legal and proper. When they were done, Sarah had her copy of the contract tucked safely in her bag and a strange flutter in her stomach. "When do we leave?" she asked. 3 days. "That give you enough time to get ready?" Sarah nodded. 3 days to prepare for a journey that would either prove her right to trust again or confirm every fear she'd ever had. Those 3 days flew by. Mrs. Walsh helped her make practical traveling clothes, trousers, and a sturdy shirt that would be more suitable for riding than her dresses. Sarah took the measurements of several boarders to practice her sizing skills and stocked up on thread, needles, and fabric samples. Xander appeared each day to check on her preparations and to teach her about the camps they'd be visiting. He was patient and thorough, explaining the terrain, the kind of men they'd encounter, and what to expect. He never made her feel foolish for asking questions, no matter how basic. On the 3rd morning, Sarah stood outside the boarding house with her new traveling bag, her stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. Xander rode up leading a second horse, a gentle mare with kind eyes. "This is Willow," he said. "She's steady and won't spook easy. She'll be yours for our trips." "You're letting me use your horse." "Our horse. Business partners, remember." He helped her mount, adjusting the stirrups to fit her legs. Sarah had ridden before, but not often, and certainly not for long distances. Still, Willow seemed to sense her uncertainty and moved smoothly beneath her. They rode north out of Austin as the sun climbed higher, heading into the hill country. Xander set an easy pace, letting Sarah adjust to the saddle. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh way, all scrub brush and limestone outcroppings under an endless blue sky. "First camp is about 6 hours from here," Xander said. "We'll stop halfway to rest the horses and eat." The ride was long but not unpleasant. Xander pointed out landmarks and wildlife, told her stories about the area, and made sure she was comfortable. When they stopped at a creek to water the horses, he unpacked dried meat and cornbread for lunch. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Sore, but all right." Sarah stretched her legs, trying to work out the stiffness. "It gets easier. By the end of the week, you'll be riding like you were born to it." He handed her a canteen. "The camp we're heading to is mostly prospectors, about 20 men, decent sorts for the most part. Let me do the talking at first until you get a feel for them. What if they don't want a seamstress?" "They will, trust me. Most of these men haven't had a proper shirt in months, and they're tired of looking like they crawled through a briar patch." He was right. When they rode into the mining camp that afternoon, the prospectors gathered around with curiosity that turned to interest when Xander explained Sarah's services. Within an hour, she had a stack of torn shirts to mend and orders for 3 new ones. "I'll have these ready in 2 days," she told them. "We'll be camped just south of here." Xander had already set up a neat camp away from the miners, but close enough to be within shouting distance if needed. He'd erected a small tent for Sarah and laid out his bedroll by the fire. "You know what you're doing," Sarah observed as she watched him work. "Done it enough times. Spent years in the mountains before I came to Texas. You learn to be efficient." They fell into an easy routine. Sarah worked on the mending while Xander hunted and prepared their meals. When darkness fell, they sat by the fire talking quietly. Xander told her about Colorado, about the mountains and winters so harsh they could kill you in hours. Sarah found herself sharing stories about growing up in Missouri, about her mother who died when she was young, and her father's slow descent into gambling. "He promised he'd stop," she said, staring into the flames. "Every time he swore it was the last time, and every time he went back. That's not on you. Gambling's a sickness. Some men can't stop no matter how much they want to. But I believed him. Every single time. How stupid was I?" Xander's voice was gentle but firm. "You weren't stupid. You loved him and wanted to believe the best. That's not a weakness, even if it feels like one now." Sarah looked over at him, at his strong profile in the firelight. "How do you do that? Do what? Stay so steady, so certain?" "You lost everything too, but you don't seem bitter." He was quiet for a long moment. "I am bitter. Some days more than others. But I figured out that being angry at the world won't bring my family back. All I can do is try to be the kind of man my wife would have been proud of. Honor her memory by keeping my word and treating people right." Something deep in Sarah's chest ached at his words. She wanted to reach across the space between them to offer comfort, but she didn't trust herself enough yet. The next 2 days passed in a blur of sewing. Sarah worked dawn to dusk, her fingers flying as she mended and created. Xander brought her food and water, made sure she took breaks, and stood watch over the camp. Several miners stopped by to check on their orders and stayed to chat, clearly starved for company. One of them, a burly man named Jack, lingered longer than the others. "You're mighty pretty for a seamstress," he said, his eyes roaming in a way that made Sarah uncomfortable. Xander appeared so suddenly and silently that Jack actually startled. "Miss Henderson's working," he said quietly, but there was steel underneath the courtesy. "Best let her get to it." Jack raised his hands and backed off. "No offense meant, Stone, none taken, long as we understand each other." After Jack left, Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Thank you. Told you I'd keep you safe. Meant it." Xander settled back into his spot by the fire, cleaning his rifle with practiced motions. "Most of these men are good sorts, just lonely. But there's always one or two who need reminding about manners. And if they don't take the reminder—" His hands paused on the rifle, his eyes going hard. "Then I make sure they understand in terms they can't ignore, but it won't come to that. My reputation in these camps is solid. Nobody wants trouble with me." Sarah believed him. Despite his generally calm demeanor, there was a coiled strength to Xander that suggested he could be very dangerous when necessary. On the 3rd day, she delivered the completed orders. The miners were thrilled, their rough faces lighting up as they examined the neat stitching and proper repairs. They paid promptly, and several placed new orders for their next visit. "Told you," Xander said with something that might have been smugness as they packed up camp. "You've got a talent people need. By the end of the month, you'll have more work than you can handle." He was right. Over the next 3 weeks, they visited 5 more camps and 2 small settlements. At each stop, Sarah's reputation grew. She was the seamstress who did quality work, who charged fair prices, and who was under the protection of Xander Stone. Between her earnings and the supplies Xander traded, they were both doing well. More importantly, Sarah was starting to relax. Xander kept every promise he made, no matter how small. If he said he'd have coffee ready at dawn, it was there. If he promised to return from hunting by noon, he was back with time to spare. When he said he'd keep watch while she bathed in a creek, she never saw him turn or heard him approach until she was fully dressed and called for him. His reliability was as steady as the sunrise, and slowly, almost against her will, Sarah began to trust him. One evening, camped in a meadow under a sky full of stars, Sarah finally voiced what she'd been thinking. "Why haven't you asked me anything?" Xander looked up from the saddle he was repairing. Asked you what? About my past. About the men who broke their promises. You know bits and pieces, but you've never pushed for details. Figured you'd tell me if you wanted to, not my place to dig. Most people would be curious. I'm not most people. He set down the saddle and met her eyes across the fire. Your past is yours, Sarah. All I care about is the present, and right now, you're my partner and my friend. That's enough for me. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Thomas, my fiancé, asked me everything, wanted to know every thought in my head, every moment of my day. Said it was because he loved me and wanted to know everything about me. Then he used what I told him to make me feel small and stupid. Xander's jaw tightened. That's not love, that's control. I know that now, but at the time I thought it meant he cared. When he left me for that saloon girl, he told everyone I was frigid and boring. Said that's why he couldn't stay. He was a fool and a coward. Xander's voice was fierce. You're neither of those things. You're brave and skilled and stronger than you give yourself credit for. Tears stung Sarah's eyes. You barely know me. I know what I've seen. You could have given up after that robbery, could have crawled home to Missouri defeated. Instead, you picked yourself up, took a chance on a stranger's offer, and built something new. That takes courage. Sarah wiped her eyes, embarrassed by the emotion. I'm afraid, she admitted. Afraid that I'll believe in something again and it'll all fall apart. Afraid that I'm too broken to trust anyone. Xander stood and walked around the fire, settling down beside her. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. You're not broken, cracked maybe like we all are, but that's where the light gets in. Is that what you tell yourself about losing your family every day? His voice went rough. Emma was everything to me. We met when we were both 17, married at 18. She was small and fierce, with a laugh that could light up a room. And our daughter, Lily, she was only 4 when the fever took her. 4 years old and full of questions and mischief and love. Sarah turned to look at him, seeing the grief etched into his features. I'm so sorry. It's been 5 years, and some days it feels like yesterday, but Emma made me promise right before she died that I wouldn't let grief make me mean. That I'd keep being the man she fell in love with, even without her. He looked at Sarah, his gray eyes shining with unshed tears. So that's what I'm trying to do, keep my promises, even the ones made to ghosts. Without thinking, Sarah reached over and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and solid. They sat like that until the fire burned low, 2 broken people finding comfort in shared silence. Something shifted between them that night. The next morning, there was an ease that hadn't been there before. Xander smiled more, and Sarah found herself laughing at his dry observations about the landscape and wildlife. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in each other's presence in a way Sarah had never experienced with anyone. But she still wasn't ready to risk her heart. Trust was one thing. Love was another entirely. They returned to Austin at the end of the month with both pack horses laden with furs and goods Xander had traded for. Sarah had a substantial stack of coins sewn into a hidden pocket in her bag, more money than she'd ever had at one time. Mrs. Walsh greeted them with warm hugs and a knowing look that Sarah pretended not to notice. You both look well. The work suits you. It does, Sarah admitted. She paid Mrs. Walsh in full for the next 2 months and still had money left over. We're heading out again in a week. Is my room still available? Of course, dear. It'll always be here when you need it. Xander had dismounted and was checking his supplies, but Sarah felt his attention on her. They hadn't discussed the future beyond this trip. Now they needed to. That evening, they met at the small restaurant near the hotel where Xander was staying. Over steak and potatoes, they tallied their earnings and discussed their next route. We could head west this time, Xander suggested. There are settlements near the Guadalupe River that don't get much traffic. Probably good opportunity there. How far? Week's ride. We'd be gone about a month total. Sarah pushed her food around her plate, gathering courage. Xander, can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you really suggest this partnership? And don't say it was just for company. He set down his fork and leaned back, studying her. You want the truth, always. That first day when I found you on the road, you reminded me of Emma. Not in looks, but in spirit. She had that same stubborn strength, that refusal to give up even when everything was falling apart. And I thought, he paused, choosing his words carefully, I thought maybe I could help you the way I couldn't help her. Maybe that would mean something. So this is about your wife, it was. At first, his eyes held hers, but it's not anymore. Sarah's heart started to hammer. What is it about now? Now it's about you. About getting to know you and wanting to keep doing that. About looking forward to our rides and our talks and just being near you. He leaned forward. I know you're not ready to hear this and I'm not asking for anything. But I want to be honest with you. I'm developing feelings for you, Sarah. Real ones. And I'll wait as long as you need to decide how you feel about that. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too warm. Sarah's first instinct was to run, to protect herself before she could get hurt again. But Xander was looking at her with such open honesty, such vulnerability, that she forced herself to stay seated. I don't know if I can do this, she said quietly. The idea of trusting someone with my heart again terrifies me. I know, and I'm not asking you to. I'm just telling you where I stand, so there's no secrets between us. He reached across the table and touched her hand lightly. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. If you want to keep our relationship strictly business, we'll do that. If you want to end the partnership altogether, I'll understand. And if someday you think you might want more, I'll be here. Sarah looked down at his hand on hers, at the calluses and scars that told stories of a hard life. You promise you'll wait, not push or pressure me. I promise. On Emma's memory, I promise. The weight of that vow settled over them both. Sarah took a shaky breath. Then I need time. I need to see if this trust I'm feeling is real or just temporary. Can we keep doing what we're doing and see where it goes? That's more than I hoped for. Xander smiled and it transformed his face. Thank you for not running. I almost did, she admitted. I still might. If you do, I'll understand, but I hope you won't. They finished their meal in a comfortable silence, both aware that something fundamental had shifted. When Xander walked Sarah back to the boarding house, he stopped at the gate. Get some rest. I'll see you in a few days to plan our next trip. Xander, Sarah caught his sleeve. Thank you for being honest. Always will be. That's a promise too. He left, and Sarah watched him go. Her emotions a tangled mess of fear and hope, and something that might have been the beginning of love. The next week was strange. Sarah found herself thinking about Xander constantly, remembering the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or how gentle his hands were despite their size and strength. Mrs. Walsh caught her daydreaming more than once and just laughed. That Stone fellow is a good man, she said one afternoon. And he looks at you like you hang the moon. I'm not ready for this, Sarah protested. Nobody's ever ready for love, dear. It just happens, and you either embrace it or spend your life wondering what if. When Xander came to finalize plans for their next trip, Sarah found herself nervous as a schoolgirl. He was the same as always, steady and calm, but there was a warmth in his eyes when he looked at her that made her heart flutter. They set out on their journey west with both excitement and trepidation filling the space between them. The route took them through some of the most beautiful country Sarah had ever seen, rolling hills and clear rivers and wildflowers blooming in unexpected places. Xander was the perfect companion. He entertained her with stories of his time in the mountains, pointed out constellations at night, and taught her how to track animals and read the weather. He never once pushed the boundaries of their relationship, but Sarah could feel his affection in every small gesture. The way he always made sure she had the most comfortable spot to sleep. How he'd bring her wildflowers he found on his morning hunts. The care he took in teaching her skills that would keep her safe in the wilderness. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into their journey, they stopped at a crystal-clear swimming hole. The day was blazingly hot, and both of them were covered in trail dust. "Go ahead," Xander said, turning his back. "I'll keep watch and take my turn after." Sarah stripped down to her chemise and dove in, the cold water a shocking relief. She floated on her back, staring up at the cloudless sky, and let herself acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Xander Stone. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt inevitable, like water finding its level. He'd proven himself again and again, kept every promise, respected every boundary. He was everything Thomas and her father and her business partner hadn't been. Honest, reliable, and genuinely good. But Sarah had been wrong before. What if she was wrong now? She climbed out of the water and dressed quickly. "Your turn." Xander glanced at her and then did a double take. "You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine, just thinking." He didn't push, just nodded and headed for the water. Sarah watched him pull off his shirt, revealing a torso so muscled it looked carved from stone. Scars crisscrossed his back and ribs, testament to a hard life survived. He dove in with barely a splash, and Sarah forced herself to look away. That night, camped under cottonwood trees with a creek burbling nearby, Sarah couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Xander, can we talk?" He looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "Of course. I'm scared, really scared, but I think I'm starting to have feelings for you too." His hands stilled. Yeah, and I don't know what to do about it, because what if I'm wrong? What if you're just good at hiding who you really are and 6 months from now you turn out to be like all the others?" Xander set down the knife and moved to sit beside her. "I can't prove I won't hurt you. I can't see the future any better than you can. All I can offer is my word and my actions. I can promise to be honest with you, to keep my word, and to treat you with respect. And I can promise that if I ever fail you, it won't be for lack of trying. That's not much to build on. No. But it's all anyone's got. Love is always a risk, Sarah. The question is whether I'm worth taking that risk for." Sarah looked at him, at his honest face and steady eyes, and made her decision. "I think maybe you are." She leaned in and kissed him, soft and hesitant. Xander went completely still for a heartbeat, and then his arms came around her, careful and warm. The kiss deepened, and Sarah felt years of fear and pain start to crack apart. When they finally pulled back, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "We'll go as slow as you need. No pressure, no expectations. Just us figuring this out together. Promise, promise." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms while the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead. The next few weeks were a revelation. Sarah had never known a relationship could be like this. Xander courted her with a patience and care that made her previous experiences seem like cheap imitations. He asked permission before touching her, respected when she needed space, and never made her feel pressured or rushed. They talked about everything. Their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future, the wounds of their pasts. Xander told her more about Emma and Lily, and Sarah found she wasn't jealous of his love for them. If anything, it made her trust him more. A man who loved that deeply and grieved that honestly was capable of real devotion. By the time they returned to Austin, Sarah was sure. She loved Xander Stone with a depth that both terrified and exhilarated her. And for the first time in her life, she believed she was loved in return, Mrs. Walsh took one look at them when they arrived and broke into a wide smile. "About time," she said, hugging them both. "I've never seen two people more meant for each other." That evening, sitting on the boarding house porch in the twilight, Xander took Sarah's hand. "I have something to ask you, but I want you to take all the time you need to think about it." Sarah's heart started to race. "What is it? Marry me. Not now, not until you're completely sure, but someday. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that promises can be kept and love doesn't have to hurt." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. "What if I'm not ready for months? A year? Then I'll wait a year. I'll wait however long it takes." He lifted her hand to his lips. "You're worth waiting for." Sarah let the tears fall, but they were good tears this time, healing tears. "Ask me again in 6 months. If I haven't run by then, I'll say yes. Deal." Xander pulled her close, and Sarah relaxed into his embrace. The next 6 months passed in a blur of travel, work, and deepening love. Sarah's business thrived beyond her wildest dreams. She was taking orders faster than she could fill them, and Xander's trading operation benefited from her connections. They made a formidable team, respected throughout the Texas Hill Country. More importantly, Xander continued to be exactly who he'd always been. He never faltered, never broke a promise, never gave Sarah reason to doubt. When she had nightmares about Thomas or her father, he held her until she calmed. When she panicked about trusting again, he talked her through it without judgment. When she pushed him away in fear, he gave her space but never went far. He was a rock in human form, and Sarah found herself building a life on that foundation. On the 6-month anniversary of his proposal, they were camped in their favorite meadow, the one where they'd first kissed. Sarah had been nervous all day, knowing what was coming. As the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Xander took her hand. "6 months ago, I asked you to marry me. I'm asking again now. Will you be my wife?" Sarah looked at him, at this man who'd kept every single promise he'd ever made to her, who'd waited patiently while she healed, who loved her with a steady devotion that never wavered. "Yes," she said, and it was the easiest word she'd ever spoken. "Yes, I'll marry you." Xander's face split into a grin so wide it was almost boyish. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and relief into it. "I have something for you," he said when they came up for air. He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a simple gold ring. It was Emma's. "She'd want you to have it, want you to be happy. But if you'd rather have something new, something that's just yours, I understand." Sarah picked up the ring, feeling the weight of it, the history. "Tell me about her, about the day you gave this to her." Xander sat down, pulling Sarah into his lap. "We were so young, barely more than kids. I'd worked all summer to save up for it, and I was so nervous I could barely speak. Asked her by a creek not unlike this one. She cried and said yes and slipped the ring on herself because my hands were shaking too hard to do it. She sounds wonderful," she was, "and she'd like you. You're both fighters, both strong in your way." He touched Sarah's face gently. "I loved her with everything I had, and I'll always carry her in my heart. But there's room in there for you too. Different kind of love, but just as real." Sarah slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. "I'm honored to wear it, to carry on her memory and build a new life with you." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Austin. Mrs. Walsh stood up with Sarah, and the sheriff with Xander. Most of the town turned out, along with several miners and traders who'd become friends over the past months. Sarah wore a dress she'd made herself, cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Xander wore new buckskins and had trimmed his beard, his long hair tied back neatly. When he saw Sarah walking toward him, his eyes went shiny with tears. "You're beautiful," he whispered when she reached him. "You're not so bad yourself," she whispered back, and they both smiled. The ceremony was short and sweet. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Xander kissed her tenderly while the crowd cheered. Mrs. Walsh was openly weeping, and even the stoic Sheriff Morrison looked misty-eyed. They spent their wedding night at Xander's cabin, the place where Sarah had first learned to trust again. He carried her over the threshold, then set her down carefully. "I know we've been traveling together for months," he said, suddenly awkward. "But this is different. You tell me if anything's too much or too fast, all right." Sarah cupped his face in her hands. "I trust you, completely. Show me what love is supposed to be like." And he did, with a tenderness and passion that drove away the last shadows of Sarah's past. They made love by firelight, learning each other's bodies with patience and joy. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah felt something inside her finally heal completely. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what? For keeping your promises, for being patient, for showing me that not all men are liars." Xander kissed her forehead. "Thank you for giving me a second chance at happiness. I never thought I'd have this again. We're going to be happy. I can feel it. Yes, we are, I promise." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Sarah moved permanently into the cabin, and together they made it a home. She set up a proper workspace for her sewing, and Xander built her shelves for her supplies. They continued their trading routes, but now as a married couple, and Sarah found she loved the rhythm of it. Weeks in the wilderness working and traveling, then time in Austin to rest and resupply. Their reputation grew. Stone and Henderson Supplies became the name to trust in the hill country. They were known for fair dealing, quality goods, and reliability. Whatever they promised, they delivered. A year after their wedding, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She told Xander one evening over dinner, nervous about his reaction. He set down his fork slowly, his eyes going wide. "A baby." "Yes, are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed, a sound full of wonder. "Sarah, I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. A baby, our baby." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. Sarah felt him shaking and realized he was crying. "I didn't think I'd get this again," he said against her hair. "Didn't think I deserved it after losing Lily." "You deserve every happiness," Sarah said fiercely. "And this baby is lucky to have you as a father." They adjusted their travel schedule as Sarah's pregnancy progressed. By the time she was 6 months along, they'd stopped the long routes and stayed closer to Austin. Xander was almost comically overprotective, constantly checking on her and worrying over every twinge. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Sarah told him after he'd insisted she rest for the 3rd time that day. "I know, but I can't lose you. I can't lose another family." The fear in his voice was raw. Sarah softened, understanding his trauma. "You won't. I'm healthy, the baby's strong, and Mrs. Walsh has delivered dozens of babies. We're going to be fine. Promise." "I can't promise that. But I can promise to be careful and to let you fuss over me as much as you need." Their son was born on a warm spring morning in 1880, after a labor that lasted most of the night. Xander held Sarah's hand through it all, never leaving her side even when Mrs. Walsh suggested he might want to wait outside. "I promise to be here for better and worse," he said, wiping Sarah's sweating forehead. "This is where I belong." When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Xander cut the cord with shaking hands and then burst into tears. "A boy," Mrs. Walsh announced, placing the infant in Sarah's arms. "Healthy and strong." Sarah looked down at her son, at his tiny fists and wisps of dark hair, and fell instantly in love. "What should we name him?" Xander stroked the baby's head with one gentle finger. "What do you think of Samuel?" "It was my father's name. Samuel Stone. It's perfect." Their son thrived, growing strong and curious. Xander was a natural father, patient and playful, teaching Samuel about the world with the same steady devotion he'd shown Sarah. They continued their business but stayed closer to home, making shorter trips and taking the baby with them once he was old enough. Life wasn't always easy. There were hard seasons where money was tight, winter storms that trapped them in the cabin for weeks, and the constant challenges of frontier life. But through it all, Xander kept his promises. He was faithful and true, working hard to provide for his family and never once making Sarah doubt his commitment. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they stood on the porch of their cabin watching Samuel, now 4 years old, play in the yard. Sarah leaned against Xander, his arm around her waist. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Marrying someone so broken and scared?" "Never, not once." He kissed the top of her head. "You weren't broken, just cracked enough to let the light in, remember?" "I remember." She turned to face him. "You saved me, you know. Not just from that robbery, but from a life of bitterness and fear. You showed me what real love looks like. We saved each other. I was drowning in grief before I met you. You gave me a reason to live again." Samuel came running up, clutching a handful of wildflowers. "For Mama," he announced proudly. Sarah took the flowers, some of them already wilting from his tight grip. "Thank you, sweetheart. They're beautiful. Papa helped me pick them. He promised we'd get the prettiest ones." Sarah met Xander's eyes over their son's head and they both smiled. Even at 4, Samuel understood the importance of keeping promises. It was the foundation their family was built on. 2 years later, Sarah gave birth to a daughter. They named her Emma Rose, honoring Xander's first wife and the new beginning she represented. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. "Gentle," Xander would remind him. "She's little and needs us to be careful." "I promise, Papa." Watching her husband with their children, Sarah sometimes felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This man who'd lost everything and built it all again, who'd been patient enough to wait for her to heal, who kept every promise, big and small, day after day, year after year. They expanded the cabin as the family grew, adding rooms and building a proper barn for their horses. Sarah's sewing business evolved into a small shop in Austin that she ran with the help of 2 young women she'd trained. Xander's trading expanded to include a regular route to San Antonio and back, though he never took trips that kept him away longer than a week. "I missed too much of Lily's life because I was always working," he explained to Sarah. "I won't make that mistake again. These years with Samuel and Emma are precious. I want to be here for them." And he was. He taught Samuel to ride and hunt, to track animals and read the weather. He braided Emma's hair in the mornings and told her stories of the mountains at bedtime. He was present and engaged, the kind of father Sarah had always wished for but never had. On Samuel's 8th birthday, they had a celebration with neighbors and friends. The cabin was full of laughter and music, and Sarah felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. Later, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep, she and Xander sat on the porch in the twilight. "Happy?" Xander asked, pulling her close. "Beyond words. Sometimes I can't believe this is my life, that I get to have you after everything. I know the feeling." He was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about that day I found you on the road. What if I'd ridden past? What if you'd been too scared to trust me? But you didn't, and I wasn't. We found each other when we both needed it most. Best thing that ever happened to me besides Emma and Lily. You brought me back to life." Sarah kissed him softly. "We brought each other back." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the Texas hills. Somewhere an owl hooted and the creek bubbled over stones. Inside, their children slept safe and warm. It was everything Sarah had stopped believing was possible. "Xander," she said softly, Hum. Thank you for keeping your promises. Every single one. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes soft with love. That's easy when the promise is to you. You make me want to be the man I always hoped I could be. You already are that man you always have been. As the years passed, their love only deepened. They weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. There were years when the rains didn't come and money was tight. A terrible winter when Emma got sick and they nearly lost her, spending 3 terrified days and nights nursing her back to health. The slow aging of Mrs. Walsh, who'd become like a mother to Sarah, and her eventual peaceful death surrounded by people who loved her. Through it all, Xander was steady as stone, living up to his name. He kept his word, supported Sarah's dreams, and loved their family with a devotion that never wavered. And Sarah, who'd once been too afraid to trust, found the courage to love completely. Samuel grew into a young man much like his father, strong and honest and kind. He took over more of the trading business, eventually expanding it to include routes all the way to Houston. Emma became a gifted seamstress, inheriting her mother's talent and patience. She opened her own shop in Austin when she was 21, and it quickly became the most sought-after dressmaker in the region. Sarah and Xander watched their children build their own lives with pride and joy. They'd done what they'd set out to do, created a family built on trust and love, and kept promises. On their 25th wedding anniversary, they rode out to the meadow where Xander had first proposed. They were older now, gray threading through their hair and lines etched around their eyes. But the love between them burned as strong as ever. 25 years, Sarah marveled, settling into Xander's arms. A quarter-century of promises kept, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. He kissed her temple. You're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You're biased. Completely, but also right. He pulled back to look at her seriously. I want you to know something. When I made those promises to you way back at the beginning, I meant every word. But I had no idea how deep this would go, how much I'd come to depend on you, need you, love you. You're not just my wife. You're my best friend, my partner, my home. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I feel the same way. You taught me to trust again, and that opened up my whole life. Everything good I have came from taking that leap of faith with you. They made love in the meadow under the stars, their bodies familiar and comfortable after decades together, but still capable of igniting passion. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She'd been so broken when they'd met, so convinced that she'd never be able to open her heart again. But Xander had been patient. He'd kept his promises, big and small, until she'd had no choice but to believe in him. And in believing in him, she'd learned to believe in herself again. "What are you thinking?" Xander asked, his voice drowsy. "That I'm grateful for every broken promise that led me to you, for every hurt that taught me to recognize real love when I found it, for the courage to take a chance on a mountain man who rode out of nowhere and changed my life. I'm the lucky one. You could have said no to my proposal, to the business partnership, to all of it, but you took a chance on me too. Best decision I ever made." They rode back to the cabin at sunrise, arriving to find their children and grandchildren waiting for them. Samuel had 4 children now, ranging from 12 down to 3. Emma had recently married a good man, a doctor who'd moved to Austin from New Orleans, and was expecting their first child. The family gathered for a celebration that lasted all day. There was food and music and laughter, 3 generations coming together to honor the love that had started it all. Sarah watched Xander with their grandchildren, his patience as endless with them as it had been with their own children, and felt her heart overflow. As the sun set and the party wound down, Samuel pulled Sarah aside. "Ma, I wanted to thank you For what, sweetheart? For showing me what marriage should be. You and Pa, you've got something special. The way he looks at you, the way you trust each other. That's what I wanted with Caroline, and I got it because I knew what to look for. Sarah hugged her son tight. Your father did that. He showed both of us what real love looks like. You both did. It takes two to build something that strong. After everyone had left and the cabin was quiet again, Sarah and Xander prepared for bed. It was a routine they'd performed thousands of times, comfortable and familiar. But tonight felt different, weighted with significance. We've had a good life, Sarah said, brushing out her hair. The best. Xander came up behind her, taking the brush to do it himself, another nightly ritual. And we're not done yet. Got a lot of years left, God willing. Promise, he met her eyes in the mirror, his expression tender. I can't promise how long we've got. But I can promise that whatever time we have, I'll spend it loving you. That's one promise I'll keep until my last breath. Sarah turned and pulled him into a kiss. That's all I need. That's all I've ever needed. The years continued to pass, each one adding layers to their love. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family, respected throughout Austin and the surrounding territory. Their story became a bit of a legend, the seamstress and the mountain man who'd found each other in the wilderness and built an empire on trust and kept promises. Sarah's shop became a landmark in Austin, employing a dozen seamstresses and producing some of the finest clothes in Texas. Xander's trading company expanded to include 3 routes and a warehouse in town. But they never forgot where they'd started, 2 broken people who'd taken a chance on each other. They took one last trip to their mountain, the one where they'd spent so many nights camping under the stars. Sarah was 70 now, Xander 72, but they were both still healthy and strong. They rode slowly, taking their time, enjoying the journey as much as the destination. The meadow looked the same as it had all those years ago, eternal and peaceful. They set up camp and sat by the fire as darkness fell, comfortable in the silence that only decades of companionship could create. Do you have any regrets? Sarah asked, the question she'd asked him so many times over the years. Only one, Xander said, and Sarah's heart seized until she saw the twinkle in his eye. That I didn't find you sooner. Think of all the years we could have had. She swatted his arm playfully. We've had plenty of years, more than most people get. Never enough. He pulled her close and Sarah settled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. But I'm grateful for every day, every moment. You made my life worth living again. We did that for each other. That's what love is supposed to do. They stayed in the meadow for 3 days, reliving memories and making new ones. On the last night, lying under a canopy of stars, Xander took Sarah's hand. I want you to know something. If I go first, you don't have to stay alone. Emma would want you to be happy, and so would I. Xander Stone, don't you dare talk about dying. We've got years left. I know. But just in case, I want you to know, promise me you'll keep living, keep being happy. Sarah squeezed his hand, tears sliding down her temples into her hair. Only if you promise the same. If I go first, you don't shut down. You stay connected to our family and keep living. Deal? Though I think we'll probably go together the way we've done everything else. From your lips to God's ears. They made it back to Austin tired but happy, greeted by their children and grandchildren with hugs and relief. Samuel had been worried about them taking such a long trip at their age, but Xander had insisted. We needed to go back one more time, he explained to his son. To remember where it all started. Life continued its steady rhythm. Sarah and Xander slowed down, letting their children take over most of the businesses while they enjoyed the fruits of their labor. They spent long mornings on the porch, watching the sunrise and talking about everything and nothing. Afternoons often found them napping together in their bed, still entwined after all these years. Evenings brought family dinners, grandchildren clamoring for stories of the old days. Samuel's oldest daughter asked one night, "Grandma, how did you know Grandpa was the one?" Sarah looked at Xander, who smiled encouragingly. "He kept his promises," she said simply. "Every single one. When you find someone who does what they say they'll do, who treats you with respect and kindness, who loves you even when you're scared and broken, that's how you know." "But how did you trust him at first? How did you know he wasn't lying?" "I didn't." That's what trust is, taking a risk on someone even when you're not sure. But your grandpa made it easy. He was patient and consistent and never tried to rush me. He proved himself day by day until I couldn't doubt him anymore. Xander reached over and took Sarah's hand, their fingers lacing together automatically. "Your grandma taught me something too," he told his granddaughter. "She showed me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections fit with yours, who'll walk through life with you no matter how hard the road gets." The young girl sighed happily. "I want a love like yours someday." "You'll find it," Sarah assured her. "Just don't settle for anything less than someone who keeps their promises." On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a massive celebration. 3 generations filled the expanded cabin and spilled out into the yard. There was music and dancing, food enough for an army, and speeches that had everyone laughing and crying. Samuel stood up to toast his parents. "To 2 people who showed all of us what real love looks like. Pa, you're the strongest man I know, not because of your muscles but because of your character. You've never wavered, never faltered, never broken a promise. Ma, you taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Together, you built something beautiful. Here's to 30 more years." Everyone raised their glasses and Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Xander stood and pulled her up with him. "I want to say something," he announced. 30 years ago, I made a promise to this woman. I promised to love her, protect her, and keep every promise I made. I've done my best to honor that vow, and I'll keep doing it for however long we have left. Sarah Henderson Stone, you're the love of my life, my partner, my everything. Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely mountain man. Thank you for trusting me when you had every reason not to. Thank you for 30 years of happiness." He kissed her deeply while the crowd cheered and whistled. When they pulled apart, both were crying. "Thank you for being worth the risk," Sarah whispered against his lips. "Thank you for teaching me to trust again. Thank you for keeping every promise. I love you, Xander Stone. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." The party continued late into the night, but eventually, Sarah and Xander slipped away to their room. They made love slowly, tenderly, celebrating 3 decades of partnership and passion. Afterward, Sarah lay in Xander's arms, listening to his heartbeat and feeling completely at peace. "We did it," she murmured. "We built a good life, the best life." Xander kissed her forehead. "And we're not done yet." They weren't. They had years still ahead of them, years of watching grandchildren grow and businesses flourish and love deepen. They took walks every evening, hand in hand, talking about the day and their plans for tomorrow. They worked in the garden together, Xander turning the soil while Sarah planted. They sat on the porch in the cool evenings, Xander carving small toys for the grandchildren while Sarah quilted. It was a quiet life, a peaceful life, built on the foundation of trust and kept promises. And when people asked Sarah what the secret was to their long, happy marriage, she always gave the same answer. He kept his promises, all of them, and that made all the difference. Xander Stone and Sarah Henderson Stone lived to see their 35th anniversary, surrounded by 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. They were pillars of Austin society, respected and loved by everyone who knew them. On a warm spring evening, much like the one where their son was born, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset. Their children and grandchildren were visiting, the yard full of life and laughter. But for this moment, Sarah and Xander were alone, wrapped in each other's presence. "No regrets?" Sarah asked, the question that had become their ritual over the years. "Not a single one." Xander kissed her temple. "You? Only that I wasted so many years being afraid before I found you, but maybe that was necessary. Maybe I needed all those broken promises to recognize a kept one when I found it. Everything led us to each other. I believe that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their family. Samuel was playing with his grandchildren, his wife watching fondly. Emma was showing her daughter how to sew, passing on the tradition Sarah had started. The next generation of Stones was growing strong and true, built on the foundation of love and trust their grandparents had established. "We did good," Sarah said softly. "We did better than good. We built something that'll last long after we're gone. A family that knows the value of keeping promises, of loving hard and true, of never giving up on each other." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From that dusty road where she'd stood alone and afraid, to this porch where she sat surrounded by love and family. It had all started with one man on a horse, a mountain man who'd kept his promise to take her to Austin. And then he'd kept every promise after that. The fear that had once controlled her life seemed like a distant memory now. In its place was a certainty, built over decades of consistency and love, that she was cherished and valued and safe. Xander had given her that. But more than that, he'd given her the courage to open her heart again, to risk everything for the chance at real love. And she'd given him the same gift, a second chance at family and happiness after tragedy had taken everything. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, one by one, Xander helped Sarah to her feet. They walked inside together, stopping to kiss their children and grandchildren goodnight, to listen to one more story or answer one more question. Then they retired to their room, this space they'd shared for so many years. They helped each other undress, a familiar routine made tender by decades of repetition. They climbed into bed and wrapped around each other the way they always had, fitting together perfectly. "I love you," Sarah whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, forever and always. That's a promise." "I know. You've never broken one yet, and he never would." Xander Stone kept his word until his very last day, loving Sarah with a devotion that never wavered. They had 7 more years together, 7 years of peace and joy and the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. When Xander passed away at 79, peacefully in his sleep with Sarah holding his hand, the entire town of Austin mourned. He'd been a pillar of the community, a man whose word was his bond, whose kindness had touched countless lives. Sarah grieved deeply but without regret. They'd had 42 years together, years filled with love and laughter and kept promises. She knew how lucky she was to have had that, to have found a man who'd proven that not all promises were meant to be broken. She lived another 3 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued to sew, though her fingers weren't as nimble as they once were. She told stories of her mountain man to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive. And on a warm spring evening, sitting on the porch of the cabin they'd built together, Sarah closed her eyes and let go. Her last thought was of Xander, of his promise to love her forever and always. He'd kept that promise. Even in death, she felt his love surrounding her. The Stone family continued to thrive. generation after generation. They became ranchers and shopkeepers, teachers and doctors, spreading across Texas and beyond. But they all knew the story of how it started, with a seamstress and a mountain man who'd found each other in the wilderness. And they all understood the lessons Sarah and Xander had taught them. That promises are meant to be kept, that trust must be earned, and that real love requires courage, patience, and unwavering devotion. The cabin still stands outside Austin, preserved by the family as a reminder of where they came from. Visitors can see the workshop where Sarah sewed, the porch where they watched sunsets, the bedroom where they loved and laughed and grew old together. And if you're very quiet, very still, some say you can feel their presence there. Xander's steady strength and Sarah's hard-won courage, still lingering in the space they made holy with kept promises and earned trust. Their story became a legend in Texas, passed down through generations. The seamstress who was afraid to love, and the mountain man who taught her that promises could be kept. Two broken people who found each other and built something beautiful, something that lasted forever.